Someone was pounding on my door like the mountain was on fire. I had been in the workshop for 4 hours straight. The orbital sander was running, walnut dust floating in the air like fine brown snow, the smell of it sharp and earthy and familiar. My hands knew exactly what they were doing. The dining table I was finishing had taken me 3 weeks to get to this stage, and the grain was finally starting to speak. Outside, the Colorado wind had turned mean in the last hour. I could hear it pushing hard against the thick glass of the front window, stripping pine needles off the branches and throwing them against the cabin like tiny thrown fists. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since noon. I had checked. I knew what that kind of drop meant up here. A serious storm was not coming. It was already here. Then the hammering started. Not a polite knock. Not 2 taps and a wait. This was urgent, flat-palmed, desperate banging that cut straight through the drone of my machinery. I killed the power to the sander. The workshop went silent. The only sounds left were the wind outside and the heavy rattling of my oak front door in its frame, shaking like something wanted in badly. I set down my safety glasses, wiped the sawdust off my gray t-shirt, walked through the shop doorway into the main living area and stopped for a second, just listening. People did not come this far up the mountain ridge on a good day. On a day like this, with the sky turning the color of a bruise and the temperature falling off a cliff, nobody drove that road voluntarily. Whatever was on the other side of that door, it was not a casual visit. I turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The freezing wind hit me in the face immediately, sharp enough to sting. I ignored it, because standing on my porch was a woman I had never seen before in my life, and she looked like something that had gone very, very wrong in the last 20 minutes. She was shivering so hard her whole body was moving in small, jerky pulses. Her shoulders were completely bare and exposed to the freezing air. The only thing covering her was a thick white bath towel, wrapped around her torso and tucked tightly over her chest. Her feet were bare on my wooden porch boards. No shoes, no jacket, no coat. Just skin and a towel and the biting mountain cold that was already turning her lips a faint shade of pale. But none of that was what stopped me cold. Her head was completely covered in shampoo. Not a little, not a forgotten streak. Her entire head was stacked in a thick, sculpted mountain of white lather, the kind you build up when you are in the middle of a full wash and the hot water is running strong. Suds were sliding down her forehead, catching in her dark eyelashes, running along her jaw, dripping off her collarbone onto the towel. She blinked up at me through the soap. Her teeth were visibly chattering. And then, in the middle of all of it, she let out a breathless, slightly disbelieving laugh. "I know this sounds completely insane," she said, her voice shaking from the cold. "But my water died mid-lather. Your chimney was the only one with smoke. Can I please use your bathroom before I get frostbite?" I did not smile. Not because the image was not ridiculous, because it absolutely was. But my brain had already moved past the absurdity and landed on the facts. 29 degrees outside. Wet skin. Bare feet on a frozen porch. A person losing core body heat faster than they realized. Every second she stood there was a second her body was working harder than it should to stay warm. "Get inside," I said. I stepped back and pulled the door wide. She moved fast, hurrying past me into the entryway. Her bare feet left small, wet, soapy prints across my reclaimed oak floorboards. I shut the door behind her immediately and cut off the wind. The warmth of the cabin sealed back around us. "Second door on the left down that hallway," I said, keeping my voice even. "The water runs hot within about 15 seconds. There is a full stack of clean towels on the wire rack to the right of the shower. There is a heavy gray bathrobe on the hook behind the door. Put it on when you are done. Do not come out until your teeth stop hitting each other." She was already moving down the hall. "Thank you," she gasped, not stopping. "I am so sorry. I am Isa. I am renting the A-frame through the trees." "Carson," I said. "Go." The bathroom door clicked shut. A few seconds later, the sound of the shower roaring to life filled the hallway. I stood in the entryway and listened to it for a moment. The immediate problem was handled. She was warming up. She was safe. Now my brain moved to the next layer. A rental cabin losing water pressure suddenly. in the middle of a temperature drop, meant something specific up here. It was almost never a coincidence. Mountain plumbing under rapid freeze conditions failed in two ways. Either the main supply line froze solid, restricting flow until it stopped entirely, or a pipe had already burst somewhere under the structure, the pressure dropping to zero in seconds. Given the speed of the failure she described, and given that the ground had not been cold enough long enough for a hard freeze, a burst pipe was far more probable. And if a pipe had burst under that A-frame right now with nobody shutting off the main supply, water was still running, flooding the crawl space, soaking the subfloor. In these temperatures, that standing water would be a serious problem. Expanding water in a saturated crawl space damaged foundations slowly and expensively, the kind of damage that cost real money to fix correctly. I walked to the kitchen, pulled a clean ceramic mug from the open shelving above the counter, set the coffee maker to brew. She was going to need something hot when she came out, and I needed to think clearly about what was happening 30 yards through those trees. The wind hit the front window hard enough to flex the glass. I leaned against the counter, crossed my arms, and waited. She was in there for about 20 minutes. I had refilled the wood rack beside the fireplace, checked the weather on my phone, confirmed that the main road down the mountain was already showing ice warnings, and started thinking through the tools I would need if the A-frame situation was as bad as I suspected. By the time the bathroom door finally opened and quiet footsteps moved down the hallway, I had already made several quiet decisions. She appeared in the kitchen doorway and I assessed her quickly, accurately, without sentiment. She was wearing my gray robe, which swallowed her completely, the sleeves rolled up 3 times to free her hands. Her dark hair was fully rinsed now, wrapped in the smaller hand towel. Her face was scrubbed clean. The unnatural pallor from the cold was fading, her skin returning to a warm olive tone that told me her circulation was recovering properly. She looked to be in her early 30s, maybe a few years younger than me, with sharp, focused eyes that belonged to someone who spent a lot of time solving complicated problems under pressure. She was not panicked. She was recalibrating. I respected that immediately, even if I did not say so. Better? I asked. I pushed the steaming mug of black coffee across the kitchen island toward the stool on the opposite side. Significantly, she said. She crossed to the stool and wrapped both hands around the mug, pulling the heat into her palms. She took a slow breath and looked around the kitchen. Her eyes moved across the open shelving, the clean counters, the organized tool rack visible through the shop doorway, taking inventory, reading the space the way someone does when they are trying to understand who lives in it. "You saved my life," she said. "Or at least my scalp." I was about 2 minutes away from rinsing my hair with sparkling water from the pantry. "What happened at the rental?" I asked. I leaned against the far counter with my hands in my pockets. "Comfortable distance. No crowding." She sighed and set the mug down. "I have no idea." The pressure was completely fine. Then there was a loud bang somewhere under the floor and the shower head just sputtered out. I checked the utility closet before I ran over here. "There is water pooling around the base of the water heater." "Burst line," I said. "Probably a fitting failure on the supply manifold." "Who manages the property?" "Apex Management," she said, reaching into the pocket of the robe. She had brought her jeans with her, folded in a bundle, and her phone was in the pocket. Smart. I need to call them now. I have a major architectural rendering due to a client by Friday. I came up here specifically for the quiet. I did not exactly budget for a plumbing disaster. She set the phone on the granite counter, and before she could even open her contacts, it buzzed. The screen lit up. Caller ID, Apex MGMT office. She looked at me for half a second. Then she answered it and put it on speaker. "Hello, yes, this is ISA at cabin 4. I was just about to call you because my water..." "Ms. Ramos." The voice that cut her off was clipped and hard, the kind of voice that had spent years using paperwork as a weapon. "We are registering a significant pressure drop and a flood sensor alert at your unit. Did you tamper with the utility bypass valve?" ISA's head pulled back slightly. "Tamper? No. I was in the shower and the water stopped. I didn't touch any valve. Our remote telemetry indicates the bypass was engaged manually prior to the pressure loss." The voice did not soften. If there is subfloor water damage resulting from tenant negligence, you are liable for repair costs per Section 4 of your short-term lease. I am dispatching our lead inspector. You will need to vacate the premises until the inspection is complete, or hold a damage deposit of $5,000. The line went dead. ISA stared at the phone on the counter. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind pushed against the glass again, steady and indifferent. She said the number quietly, almost to herself, like she was testing the weight of it. And something in the way she said it told me that number was not simply inconvenient. This was not a woman who had a spare $5,000 sitting in a rainy day account. This was a woman whose financial footing was balanced on a single freelance contract, and someone had just threatened to kick the legs out from under it. I pushed off the counter. Sympathy did not fix burst pipes. I walked to the mudroom. I pulled my heavy insulated Carhartt jacket off the hook and shrugged into it without rushing. ISA appeared in the mudroom doorway, watching me with the coffee mug still in both hands. She looked at the jacket, then at the leather tool belt I was clipping around my waist, checking each pocket by touch without looking down. Utility knife on the left, speed square in the back slot, impact driver fully charged in the right hip pocket, headlamp on the front hook, extra lag screws in the bottom pouch because I always kept extras. Habit. What are you doing? She asked. Going to your cabin, I said. I pulled a spare winter coat off the rack and held it out to her. It was an old olive green canvas work jacket, insulated, one size too large. Put that on over the robe. We need to get to your main shutoff before the water does any more damage. She took the jacket without argument, which told me she was practical. She pulled it on over the robe and her jeans, the hem of the robe hanging below the coat in a layered arrangement that made complete sense given the circumstances. She tucked her phone into the coat pocket and looked at me. You don't have to do this, she said. This isn't your problem. It becomes my problem when that subfloor floods and shifts the foundation, I said, moving toward the door. The A-frame is 30 yards from my property line. A structurally unsound building does not stay someone else's problem for long. Let's go. She did not argue again. The walk through the pine trees was brutal. This was not the kind of chill you feel walking to a parking lot. This was full mountain winter, the kind that gets into the gaps between your collar and your jaw and does not leave. The sleet had started coming down in a thin, stinging mix. Not quite snow, not quite rain, just frozen needles hitting every exposed inch of skin. I walked ahead, keeping my shoulders square to the wind so it hit me first and broke around me before reaching her. When the A-frame came into view through the tree line, I saw the problem before we even reached the porch. Water was seeping out from beneath the front skirting in a slow, dark stain spreading across the frozen ground. At the base of the porch steps, it had already sheeted over into a slick of black ice, invisible against the weathered wood. I put my hand out to the side without looking back. She stopped walking immediately. Good instincts. Ice on the steps, I said. Come around the left side. There is a ground-level access panel near the corner post. We came around the side of the cabin. The access panel was a hinged plywood door set low against the foundation skirting, held shut by a simple barrel bolt. I crouched down, threw the bolt, and swung it open. Cold, damp air rolled out of the crawl space. I unclipped the headlamp and strapped it to my forehead. Stay on the porch, I said, looking up at her. Keep your weight on the dry boards and don't move toward the steps. I will be back in under 10 minutes. She nodded, pulling the canvas jacket tighter around herself. I dropped to my hands and knees and went in. The clearance under the A-frame was roughly 2 feet, enough to move if you kept your face close to the dirt and your elbows doing most of the work. I moved forward on my forearms, headlamp cutting a bright beam through the dark. The smell was wet earth, oxidized copper, and the sharp metallic bite of water finding places it was never meant to go. I swept the beam left, then right, then I found it. The main intake pipe had separated completely from its brass fitting. Not a slow leak, not a crack, a full shear, clean and sudden. The pipe end sitting several inches away from where it was supposed to be connected, water still running in a hard, continuous spray across the dirt floor. The ground around one of the concrete pier blocks, one of the main support points that held the structure above the frost line, had turned to soft, dark mud. The water had been running long enough to wash away compacted fill around the base of that block. Before I touched the shutoff valve, I pulled out my phone and photographed everything. The sheared fitting from 4 angles, each shot timestamped. The separated pipe end. The brass fitting. The gap between them. The undersized crimp ring, the wrong diameter for the pipe it had been installed on. Sitting right there in the mud where the force of the separation had flung it. It was not tenant negligence. It was not a frozen line. It was a maintenance failure. A crimp ring the wrong size for the pipe diameter, installed by someone who either did not know better or did not care, waiting to fail under the right combination of water pressure and temperature. Tonight had been that night. Apex could not legitimately charge her for a mechanical failure on their own aging infrastructure, not with documented photographic evidence of an installation defect, and not without first pursuing proper legal channels. I wasn't going to let them get that far. I reached the main shutoff valve, gripped it with both hands, and wrenched it counterclockwise until it stopped. The spraying cut off instantly. The silence under the cabin was sudden and complete, broken only by dripping and the distant howl of wind above the floorboards. I held my headlamp steady on the pier block. The mud around it was soft for about a 6-inch radius. The block itself had not shifted, but the saturated ground around its base was a concern. If the ground stayed wet and then refroze through repeated freeze-thaw cycles, it could gradually affect the compaction around the pier. The pier wasn't going anywhere tonight, but leaving the saturated fill unaddressed wasn't good practice. A proper repair would mean repacking the fill once the ground dried, but for now, a temporary brace against the pier would give it additional stability and peace of mind. I army crawled back toward the opening. I came out into the freezing air, stood up, and brushed the dirt off my forearms and knees. Isa was on the porch where I had left her, arms wrapped around herself, watching me with an expression that was trying very hard to stay calm. "The water is off," I said. "There is a support pier whose fill got saturated from the water running. I want to put a temporary brace against it as a precaution while we get this sorted properly. The pier is stable right now, this is just good practice." She processed that quickly. "How bad is it?" "Right now? Minor. I'm just not going to leave it unaddressed. Give me another 20 minutes. I moved to the side of the property where a stack of landscaping timber sat half hidden under a blue tarp weighted down with river rocks. 6x6 posts, weathered but solid enough. I pulled the tarp back, ran my hand along 3 of the best ones, and hoisted them onto my shoulder. "Hold this," I said, handing Isa the end of my measuring tape. She took it and pulled it taut while I marked each cut line with the flat carpenter's pencil clipped inside my tool belt. I pulled the handsaw from the back of the belt and started cutting. The physical effort was almost welcome in the cold. 3 cuts, 3 posts trimmed to the right length. I went back into the crawl space twice. Once to position the braces against the concrete pier in a triangulated pattern that spread any load across 3 contact points. Once to drive the lag screws home with the impact driver, the mechanical clatter of it echoing up through the floorboards. When the last screw was set, I put both palms flat against the pier block and pushed with my full body weight. It did not move. I came back out, stood up straight, and stretched my back. The sleet was still coming down. My jacket was soaked through on the shoulders. My work pants were muddy from the knees down. "The pier is braced," I told her. "The structure is fine." And I documented the pipe fitting before I touched anything. I pulled out my phone and handed it to her. "The crimp ring that failed is the wrong size for the pipe. That is an installation defect on Apex's maintenance record, not anything a tenant caused. Those photos are time-stamped. Save them to your own phone right now. If Apex pursues any damage claim in court, those photos go with you." Isa looked at the images. Then she looked up at me. Something moved through her expression that I didn't try to name. I looked at the sky instead. The snow was coming down in thick, slow curtains now, the kind that erases everything gradually and completely. The narrow dirt road that wound down through the pines toward the main highway was already covered. I could see from where I stood that the tire tracks we had made on the way over were nearly gone, filled in and smoothed over. I said it plainly because there was no way to soften it. The road down is already impassable. Based on what this storm is doing, it will stay that way for a minimum of 2 to 3 days. Your cabin has no running water. The boiler that heats this unit runs on a pressurized hot water loop. Without the main supply line, that system is going to lose pressure and shut down within a couple of hours. This place will be well below comfortable temperature before morning. Isa looked at the cabin, then at the road, then at me. She did not fall apart. She stood in the freezing sleet and did the math the same way I had done it, moving through the options one by one and arriving at the same answer. My cabin runs on a closed-loop geothermal system and an independent well, I said. It does not rely on the main line. The heat will not go out. I have a guest room. The door has a lock. You will have full privacy. We stay out of each other's way. You do your work and I do mine until the plow comes through. She looked at me for a moment, not searching for something wrong, searching for something genuine. I kept my face exactly as it was, because there was no angle. There was a problem and there was a practical solution, and standing in the sleet debating it was not going to help either of us. She nodded once. "Give me 5 minutes to pack," she said. She was back in 4 minutes with a laptop bag, a small roller case, and her architectural tube carrier. Practical. No guastid motion. We walked back through the trees to my cabin without speaking, the snow thickening around us with every minute. I held the porch door open. She came in, stamped the snow off her feet on the mat without being asked, and stood in the entryway looking at the space the way she had looked at it the first time, but differently now. The first time she had been reading it for safety. Now she was reading it for something else. For what kind of life had built it? I showed her the guest room. It was simple. A bed with a wool blanket, a nightstand, a reading lamp on a timer, a closet with 2 empty shelves. The door had a solid lock and I pointed to it without comment. She set her bags down, looked at the room, and said it was perfect. She said it like she meant it, not like she was being polite. I showed her the spare bathroom, where the towels were kept, where she could set up her work in the kitchen if she needed a large flat surface. Then I told her I was going back to the shop, that she should eat whatever she found in the kitchen, and that the wood stove in the living room was on a thermostat and she didn't need to touch it. She said, "Okay." I nodded and turned back toward the shop. "Carson." I stopped. She was still standing in the hallway, one hand resting on the door frame of the guest room. She looked like she was about to say something careful. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the bathroom. For all of it. The shutoff. The brace. The photos. You didn't have to do any of that." I looked at her for a moment. I had a standard response for gratitude, a short, deflecting one that closed the topic cleanly. I used it most of the time. I opened my mouth to use it now. Instead I said, "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" She blinked. Then something in her face settled, like a gear finding its groove. 8 years, she said. Mostly residential. I spent the first 4 at a firm in Denver. Then the partnership dissolved and I went out on my own. She paused. "You?" 12 years in construction. Commercial, mostly. Structural work. Then I built this place and stopped taking on jobs I didn't want. She looked past me toward the shop doorway, at the corner of the dining table visible on the workbench. "Is the furniture the work you want?" "Yes." "Why furniture? After structural work, it seems like a long way down in scale." I thought about how to answer that. Most people asked some version of the same question and expected a short, interesting answer they could repeat at dinner. I usually gave them one. But she wasn't asking to be entertained. She had the focused look of someone who actually wanted to know the mechanics of a decision, the same way she had studied the joinery on the table outside. She wanted to understand how the pieces fit. "In structural work, you build something and walk away," I said. "The building either performs or it doesn't, but you're not there to see it. Furniture is different. Someone uses it every day. They put their coffee on it in the morning. Their kids do homework on it. It's in the room when everything happens. You make it right and it outlasts you." I stopped. That felt like the right reason to make something. She was quiet for a moment. "I think about that too," she said. Whether the buildings I design will outlast me. Whether the people inside them will feel anything from the decisions I made on paper. She looked at her hands briefly, then back up. It's harder to know at that scale. You don't get to see the coffee cup. I didn't say anything. She wasn't done. The project I'm finishing this week, she said. It's a community health clinic. Rural county, underfunded. They have been trying to get this built for 6 years. The whole design is around the idea that the people coming in shouldn't feel like they're a problem being processed. Good light. Real materials. Room to breathe. She said it quietly, like she was reminding herself why the deadline mattered. I came up here because I couldn't finish it in the city. Too much noise in my head. I looked at her for a long moment. You'll finish it, I said. She tilted her head slightly. You don't know that. You walked through a snowstorm in a towel to solve a problem, I said. You'll finish it. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more private than a smile. Get your work out, I said. The kitchen island is yours. I'll be in the shop. I turned and walked back through the living room. Behind me, I heard the soft sound of a zipper, the click of a laptop opening, and then the first quiet tapping of keys. I picked up my sander. I set it back down. I stood at the bench for a moment with both hands flat on the wood surface, looking at the grain pattern running through the walnut, thinking about coffee cups and community health clinics and the particular way some people talked about their work. Not to impress anyone, but because the work was genuinely the thing they were most alive inside of. Then I put on my safety glasses and got back to it. I want to be honest about something. I woke up the next morning fully expecting the discomfort of having someone in my space to hit me the moment I stepped out of my bedroom. I had built this cabin specifically to fit one person's rhythm. Every shelf was where I needed it. Every tool had its place. The silence in the mornings was mine, and I had stopped apologizing for needing it years ago. I poured my coffee at 5:30, walked to the workshop, and told myself that a few days was manageable. A contained problem with a fixed end date. By 7 o'clock, I was back in the kitchen for a refill, and that plan quietly fell apart. She was already there. Not because she was in my way. Not because she was being loud or demanding or filling the room with nervous social energy that makes the walls feel closer. She was at the kitchen island, bent over a wide architectural blueprint, a pencil tucked behind one ear and a second one gripped between her teeth. Her laptop was open beside the blueprint. Her tablet was propped against the fruit bowl at an angle she clearly thought was practical. But it kept sliding and she kept catching it with her elbow without looking up. She had made her own coffee. She had found the mugs without asking. She was completely absorbed in something on her screen. Her brow pulled together in concentration, and she hadn't noticed I was standing in the kitchen doorway at all. I watched her for about 4 seconds. Then I walked to the coffee pot, refilled my mug, and left. Back in the shop, I stood at my workbench and tried to focus on the table. The walnut surface needed 2 more passes with the finish sander before I could start the oil treatment. I picked up the sander, set it down, picked it up again. I could hear her from across the cabin, the rapid-fire clicking of her keyboard in short, intense bursts followed by long silences where she was probably staring at the blueprint again, thinking through something structural. The clicking stopped. There was a pause. Then I heard the quiet, strained sound of someone rotating their neck slowly and failing to get relief from it. I set the sander down. Her posture at that island was objectively bad. The bar stools were designed for a quick meal, not a workday. She was hunching over a screen that was too low, which meant her neck was carrying the weight of her head at an angle that would lock up her upper spine within hours. It had nothing to do with anything other than the fact that watching someone work incorrectly in my kitchen was distracting. I went to the scrap bin. There was a wide offcut of black walnut near the bottom. Beautiful tight grain, about 3/4 of an inch thick. I had been saving it without knowing what for. I pulled it out, set it on the bench, and started working. I planed the surface smooth, sanded the edges until they had no sharpness left anywhere, and cut the length to something useful. Then I found the dense upholstery foam I used for seat cushioning, cut a wedge from it at a 15-degree angle, and fastened it to the underside of the walnut board so that when it sat across a person's lap, the surface would angle slightly upward, keeping the wrists level and the screen at a natural eye height. I routed a shallow groove along the top edge, wide enough to hold a tablet or a stylus without it sliding. 45 minutes, start to finish. I tested the weight, checked the balance. It didn't rock. I carried it into the kitchen. She was still at the island, still rubbing the back of her neck with one hand, eyes narrow on the screen. I stepped up beside her and placed the walnut board on the counter without saying anything. She flinched slightly, startled, and looked up at me, then down at the object. She asked what it was. I told her her ergonomics were a problem. I pulled the low-backed armchair from the living room and positioned it at the end of the island where the light was good. I told her to sit in the chair, put the board across her lap, and angle the front edge up until her screen was level with her eyes. She looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up the board, moved to the chair, and settled it across her lap. The change in her posture was immediate. Her shoulders dropped away from her ears. Her neck straightened. She adjusted the angle once, tilted the screen up 2 inches, and went still. The sigh she let out was the kind that comes from relief so specific it almost hurts. She said it quietly, almost to herself. It was infinitely better. She said my name at the end of the sentence in a way that was simple and genuine, and I felt it somewhere behind my sternum without wanting to. I told her not to mention it, poured my coffee, and went back to the shop. For the rest of that day, we worked in parallel. She drafted. I built. The shop door was open because the heat circulated better that way, which was true, and also meant I could hear the rhythm of her keyboard from across the cabin. At some point in the afternoon, the rhythm shifted from short, urgent bursts to longer, steadier stretches. She had found her flow. I registered that without looking up from the table surface I was oiling. Around 4 in the afternoon, she appeared in the shop doorway. She didn't come inside. She stood at the threshold, one hand on the door frame, and looked at the dining table taking shape on my workbench. She was quiet for a moment, studying the joinery where the apron met the leg, the way the walnut grain ran continuous across the top surface. She asked how long it took to build something like that. I told her 6 weeks for this one. Longer if the wood needed time to acclimate. She nodded slowly, filing that away. Then she said that she designed buildings and she had never once thought about how long the furniture inside them took to make. She said it like a genuine admission, not a performed compliment. I told her most people didn't. She looked at the table for another moment and then went back to the kitchen. I looked at the empty doorway for about 3 seconds longer than I needed to, and then I went back to work. By evening, the storm outside had settled into a steady, heavy snowfall, the kind that muffles every sound and makes the world feel wrapped in something thick. I cooked dinner without planning to cook for 2, and then cooked for 2 anyway, because the deliberate alternative felt like a statement I wasn't ready to make in either direction. We ate at the kitchen island, blueprints pushed aside. We didn't talk much. She asked one question about the geothermal system, I answered it, and then we were quiet in the good way, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything from either person sitting in it. I cleaned up. She went back to her screen. I went back to the shop for another hour. When I finally came in for the night and walked past the kitchen, she was still at the island. Leaning back in the armchair now, the walnut board still across her lap, her stylus resting still between 2 fingers, staring at the blueprint without marking it. Her eyes had the particular distant quality of someone too tired to stop working but too wired to sleep. I stopped walking. I told her the light in here was hard on the eyes after dark, and that working past exhaustion produced worse decisions than stepping away for a night. She looked up at me. I kept my expression neutral. She looked back at the blueprint. She capped the stylus. She said good night. I said good night. I walked to my room and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a while, listening to the snow press against the window, thinking about nothing in particular and doing a poor job of it. Vance arrived the next morning in an ATV, stepping out of it like he owned the mountain. He had a high-visibility jacket, a thick clipboard, and the walk of a man who had done this 100 times and never once questioned himself. He didn't shake hands. He didn't introduce himself properly. He just looked at ISA, said her name like it was already on a bill, and started talking about liability before his boots were fully planted in the snow. I stayed back, 2 steps behind ISA, arms loose at my sides, saying nothing yet. I wanted to hear how far he would go before I had to stop him. He went pretty far. He said the telemetry was clear. He said the bypass valve showed manual engagement. He said that in his years managing mountain rental properties, water damage claims almost always came back to the same thing. Tenants who touched things they didn't understand and then denied it afterward. He said all of this without looking up from his clipboard. He said it like ISA wasn't even standing there. ISA's jaw was tight. I could see her hands pressed flat against her thighs, keeping still by force of will. I stepped forward. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just forward. Until I was standing at ISA's shoulder and Vance finally had to look up and register that there was someone else here he hadn't accounted for. I told him clearly and without raising my voice. The pipe did not fail because of anything the tenant did. It sheared at a crimped fitting, a 3/4-inch crimp ring installed on a 5/8-inch PX line, undersized and improperly seated. I told him I had photographed the sheared fitting from multiple angles with timestamps before touching the shutoff valve, and that those photos showed the crimp ring still attached to the broken pipe end. Any licensed plumber would identify it as an installation defect in under a minute. I told him I had also braced the foundation pier as a precautionary measure while the ground around it was saturated, and that the structure was sound. Then I told him what would happen if he walked away today with a damage charge against ISA's name. I would file a formal maintenance complaint with the county building department, request an inspection of the rental unit's apex managed on this ridge, and provide my timestamped documentation to support it. Whatever came out of those inspections was Apex's concern, not mine. But I was not going to stay quiet while a documented equipment failure got billed to a tenant. Vance's face went through several colors. He landed on a deep, hard red. He pointed his pen at me and opened his mouth to say something loud. SA moved. She stepped directly in front of him, smooth and deliberate, blocking his line of sight to me entirely. She didn't look back at me. She didn't need my signal. Her voice was clear and completely steady. She told him he had two options. Option 1. He signed a liability release right now, on that clipboard, and Apex issued a full refund for the remaining days of her lease within 7 business days. Option 2. She would pursue the matter formally. Breach of contract, renter endangerment, and loss of documented income, supported by time-stamped photographic evidence of the installation defect, with an independent structural assessment on record. She let that sit in the cold air for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Choose." Vance stared at her. Then he looked past her at me. I stood steady and said nothing. He was doing the math, and the math was simple. He had come up a mountain trail in a snowstorm expecting to bully a woman alone, and she was standing next to a licensed contractor who had documented everything before touching it. There was no version of this where he won today. He yanked a pen from his breast pocket, flipped to the back page of his clipboard, and signed with hard, fast strokes. He ripped the yellow carbon copy free and shoved it at ISA without looking at her. He said the refund would be processed. He said her belongings needed to be out when the road cleared. He turned and walked back to his ATV with the over-controlled stride of a man trying not to look like he was retreating. He climbed in, threw it into reverse, hit the gas too hard. The rear tracks slid off the packed snow trail and dropped into the drainage ditch running alongside it. The ATV tilted hard, the engine revving as the tracks spun in the soft, frozen mud beneath the snow, finding nothing to grip. The vehicle settled at a sharp angle and stopped. The engine cut out. Silence. ISA turned and looked at me. Her eyes were bright. I looked at the ATV. I looked at Vance sitting rigid behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. SA said quietly that I didn't have to help him. I knew that. A part of me wanted to walk back to the cabin and let him wait for the road crew. He had come up here ready to use paperwork as a weapon against someone who had done nothing wrong. But I thought about what it meant to do a job correctly. Not just when it was easy. Not just when the person deserved it. Because the standard mattered regardless of who was watching. I told ISA I would be right back. I walked to my cabin at a steady pace, went to the utility shed off the back, and pulled out my recovery winch and 2 thick timber blocks. I carried them back down the trail, set the blocks as anchors against a large Douglas fir with deep enough roots to hold the load, and rigged the winch line under the ATV's front frame. I checked every connection point. Then I picked up the remote handset. The winch pulled slow and even. The ATV groaned, rocked, and began to climb. I adjusted the angle with a second line to keep the vehicle tracking straight. After 3 steady pulls, the tracks found solid ground and the ATV leveled out completely. I unhooked the line and coiled it over my forearm. I walked up to the driver's side window. Vance was looking straight ahead, hands on the wheel, with the stillness of a man who knew he owed something he didn't want to pay. I told him to keep it in low gear on the descent and stay centered on the trail. The soft shoulder was deeper than it looked for the first quarter mile. He nodded once, short and stiff, without speaking. He drove away. I stood there and watched the ATV disappear around the first bend, the sound of its engine fading into the trees. Then I turned back. Isa was still on the porch. She was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not relief, not satisfaction. Something quieter and heavier than either. The look of someone who had walked into a situation with one understanding of the world and was standing on the other side of it holding a different map. She didn't say anything when I walked back up the porch steps. Neither did I. The tension that had been living in her shoulders for 2 days was simply gone. And the silence between us, standing there in the cold, felt different from every silence that had come before it. On the 5th morning, I woke up before my alarm and lay in the dark for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, listening. I could hear her moving in the kitchen, the quiet clink of a mug being set on the counter, the soft percussion of fingers on a keyboard already running. She had been up before me, which meant she hadn't slept well either, and I wasn't sure what to do with that information. The signed release from Apex was sitting on the corner of my kitchen counter. The storm had broken 2 days ago, leaving the world outside clean and brutally bright. And the road, I had checked the county plow schedule the night before, it would be cleared by mid-morning. That was the problem. I got up, pulled on my work clothes, and walked into the kitchen. Isa was sitting at the island in the armchair I had moved there 4 days ago, the walnut lap desk across her thighs, her tablet propped in the groove I had routed for exactly that angle. Her hair was loose. She was wearing the same oversized gray sweater she'd had on since day 2, and she had a pencil tucked behind her ear and another one held between her teeth while she used both hands to resize something on her screen. She didn't hear me come in. I watched her work for about 4 seconds longer than I should have. Then I walked to the coffee maker and reached for 2 mugs instead of 1. She looked up. Something passed between us in that small, ordinary moment, the fact that I had reached for 2 mugs without thinking about it, and I saw her notice it. She didn't say anything. She just looked back at her screen, but the corner of her mouth moved in a way she was clearly trying to control. I set her coffee on the counter within reach and took mine to my side of the island. We worked in parallel for 2 hours. The comfortable kind of quiet that doesn't need to be explained or filled. I was doing load calculations for a joinery commission on paper, pencil, and graph paper, old habit. She was finishing the last revision pass on her rendering file. At one point she asked me, without looking up, whether a cantilevered shelf bracket needed a full gusset or if a half gusset with a longer lag bolt pattern would hold under dynamic load. I told her it depended on the wall substrate and the bracket's moment arm. She asked what I would do. I said full gusset, always. The extra 20 minutes was cheaper than the callback. She typed something. Then she said she was putting that in her notes. I kept my eyes on my graph paper. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed on the counter. County road alert. The plow had reached the lower switchback. Estimated clear time for the upper ridge trail, 11:15. I set the phone face down. Isa had seen it. She closed her laptop slowly. The sound of the latch was very loud in the quiet kitchen. She said she had sent the final project file to her client the previous night at midnight. She had stayed up to send it because she wanted it done before the road cleared. She wasn't sure why she was telling me that. Maybe she just needed to say it out loud. I turned my coffee mug in a slow circle on the counter without picking it up. She told me the client had replied that morning. They loved it. The advance payment would hit her account the next business day. Enough to cover 3 months of operating costs and give her a clean file to bring to a business loan appointment she had scheduled for the following week. I said that was good. I said she had earned it. My voice came out flat and I hated that it did. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said my name. Not the way she said it when she needed something practical answered. She said it differently, slower, like she was deciding something at the same time. She told me she didn't know how to do this. She had been sitting here for the last hour trying to figure out how to pack her bag and drive back down the mountain and return to her apartment and her routines and her plans as if the week had been a simple interruption. As if it had been nothing more than a plumbing failure, a snowstorm, and a borrowed bathrobe. She said it didn't feel like nothing. I stood up from the stool. I didn't pace. I just stood, both hands flat on the counter, looking at the grain of the wood because it was easier than looking at her while I figured out what I was going to say. I told her about the year before she arrived. Not in detail, just the shape of it. The way I had structured my life up here with such deliberate precision that there was no room for anything unexpected. No room for disruption. No room for anyone. I told her I had convinced myself that was strength, that being completely self-contained was the most honest way to live. I told her I had been wrong about that, not about all of it, but about the part that said the walls needed to stay up. She had come around to my side of the island without me hearing her move. She was standing close. Not touching, just close. When I finally looked up from the countertop, her eyes were already on mine. She said she had built her own walls too. After a business partnership collapsed, after months of dealing with the fallout and the specific exhaustion of having trusted someone completely and been completely wrong about them, she had rebuilt herself into someone who didn't lean on people, who didn't need to. She said it was exhausting, maintaining all that self-sufficiency, and she hadn't realized how exhausting it was until she spent several days watching someone be capable and steady and completely present without ever asking for credit for any of it. I told her if she stayed, it wouldn't be a favor and it wouldn't be a rescue. I didn't build temporary things and I wasn't interested in starting. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said she knew that. She had known it since the lap desk. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the door. We drove down the mountain in my truck, the freshly plowed road running clean and straight beneath us, the valley opening up ahead into the small town that sat at the base of the ridge. I parked in front of the community center and we walked in together, snow still on our boots. I went to the permits desk. I laid out the structural rebuild documentation I had drafted the previous evening for the Apex A-frame, the pier reinforcement spec, the pipe replacement notes, the crawl space access improvements. I told the clerk I was filing as an independent contractor, not through Apex, and that I was listing a co-designer on the permit application. I slid the form and the pen across the counter to ISA. She looked at the paper. She looked at the line with her name already written in the designer field in my handwriting. She looked at me. It was not a speech. It was not a declaration dressed up in dramatic language. It was a document, a practical, legal, permanent record that said her name and my name belonged on the same line. She picked up the pen and signed. We walked out of the community center and stood under the entrance awning while snow began drifting down again in soft, unhurried flakes. The town moved around us. A truck pulling out of the hardware store parking lot. A woman walking a dog along the cleared sidewalk. The ordinary world doing its ordinary things. I turned to her. I reached out and placed my hand against the side of her face for the first time. Her skin was warm. She closed her eyes and leaned into my palm and let out a breath she had been holding for days. I leaned in and kissed her. It was not rushed. It was not uncertain. It had the quality of every well-cut joint I had ever made. The moment when two pieces, shaped separately over careful work, come together cleanly, with no gap and no force needed. Just solid, quiet contact. When I pulled back, she was looking at me with bright, steady eyes. She said, "So what do we build first?" I almost smiled. Actually smiled. I told her the A-frame pier needed a proper concrete footing before we could close out the permit. I told her the rendering she had designed for her client had 3 structural details I wanted to talk through. And I told her the guest room had a terrible mattress that I had been meaning to replace for 2 years. If she was going to use it long-term, we were going to fix that this week. She laughed. A real one. Clear and unguarded and entirely her own. We walked back to the truck. She got in on the passenger side without hesitating. Like she had done it 100 times before. Like it was already a habit. Like this was simply what came next. I started the engine. The mountain road stretched ahead of us. wide open and newly cleared. And for the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, I was not in any hurry to be alone.